say, what led you to this story? Because it's a very compelling story. How did you wind up there?
Well, this is a really fascinating experience. The first summer in the program, David, in your boot camp class, as we call it, I wrote a ballad about Lucy Audubon. And I was staying at a cabin, and so, yes, I don't know if we have any mics, but, so I was staying at a cabin that was in a rural area, and so I rented a couple of videos from the library and watched a documentary and became fascinated by Lucy Audubon at the end of her life. She's very poor. She's already sold a lot of the drawings, but she's still got these copper plates. So I wrote a ballad, which was a requirement for David's class, and it was okay, but it wasn't the right form for the story. But I went through the program, and then in the libretto class, there was never a question of, what do I have to write about? It just came back. Thank you. This idea of writing about Lucy Audubon just came back, and as I did more and more research, it went well beyond a class assignment into something I'm very obsessed with. It's a long story. It could be a full opera, and it will be good. And so that's what had happened. It was a great experience. So I could go on about that forever, but we want to ask more questions.
I'll only ask one more, and then we'll open it up, because I wanted to ask Karen that when you received that libretto, how did this collaboration take place, and how did you then come upon the idiom, which I think is very compelling, of tonal and yet rich and complex for this piece?
Well, Laura had asked me I think it was at a party, just said, hey, I'm writing this for this class, and we need somebody to write the music. So would you like to do that? So I thought, yeah, it was a nice challenge. I had never written an opera to somebody else's libretto. And so we went through a couple of iterations as Laura did more research and changed some things for accuracy, or just adding things that you saw was very important. And I would try to keep up. And as far as can you say your second question about the tonal and?
It has coherence, thematically and musically. It's a tonal universe.
Mm.
How do you wind up there?
Well, what I do when I'm composing for anything with words is first I read through the words, and like you might do with poetry, here's an accent, here's a stress, here's a not so much, and then after doing that, and I try to read as naturally as possible. The second time around of the same theme with different words, that was not true. I was kind of, our singers, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the second time around of a particular theme, I was just kind of stuffing the words in because I had a lot of going on in my life at that time. But I think Adam, especially that part that you were singing, he did a wonderful job smoothing that over. But I didn't miss that. But for the most part, yes, I would read like you would read a poem aloud if possible, and I'll write my stresses, and so I'll put notes on I mean, not musical notes, notes, like notes about it. And that from then, I try to figure out what meter should I write this for, and I start hearing it a little bit. I love strings, so actually, kudos to our pianist who had to. She had such a hard job of being a double string quartet. Just collapsed into what they call a piano reduction, which basically just takes the notes and and makes this here. And she had to do that. That's so. If you can imagine it with strings, and who knows, possibly something else. And then I start writing. I guess I try to picture the scene. That helps me a lot. And sometimes I'll imagine being the character. How do I feel? How do I, and I go from there. And then I obsessed over it for some time and play it over and over and over and over, and polish as much as possible. And I guess that's it. Did I answer your question?
I'm going to ask just one more and then open it up, because I wanted to ask one of the singers, and especially of the leads. It's a tremendous challenge. Goodness gracious, you have nothing to go by really as a recording or a previous or a video or anything. And I know that you, as artists at Central City, support new work. And I'm just curious about your process and your encounter with new work, and this work in particular, how you approach it. It's an incredible challenge. You have to get out there, and nobody's ever even heard these notes or words before. Comments, thoughts?
I think I probably had the easier job of the two of us, just because my music tends to be a lot more lyrical, a little more sweeping, and a little more naturally speech-like. So thank you for taking on the harder lines, Emily. I think my biggest challenge, there are a couple spots that do get a little wordy, which is perfectly fine. It's a very natural flow of speech, but when you put it to music, sometimes that text gets lost. So my biggest challenge was really getting the flavor of the words and trying to make them understood, and hopefully that came across.
Well, I guess my process with new music, there's no recording to work off of, or to listen to and get an idea, is to speak through the text first and read through it and kind of try to understand what the character is, who the character is, what the story is, what's going on, and then just learn the notes and put it all together and hope they like it. I play a little piano, so you play chords underneath and try to fit it in and go, okay, I think this is what was in mind. A lot of times I do try to get inside the composer's head a little bit. I'm not really a composer myself, but to figure out why that run on these words, like what is the impetus for that? Is she angry? Is she sad? Right, the character. Like the part about a mere song indeed, and there's a big, and I thought, I bet Lucy's a little PO right now. So, yeah. But we both have had a lot of experience with new music. I worked with composer Libby Larson on a premiere recording of a work that had been around for 25 years, but it was such a long song cycle, 40 minutes long for solo soprano and piano, that nobody had recorded it. So that was really exciting. There's really nothing like, if only we could work with Mozart or Puccini, to be able to work with a real live composer and say, hey, what do you think about that is really special. And Adam said,
yeah, the past several summers, after I just finished my doctorate at CU, and we have a program that we've started called CU Now, the New Opera Workshop, for the past 5 or 6 years, I think, where we'll bring in established composers and premiere a semi-staged, fully costumed performance of a work that's never been heard before. The last couple of years, we've included scenes or full acts by CU student composers, so we do get a chance to work very intimately over a 2 or 3 week span with the composers and kind of develop new works and see how things edit and change throughout the process. It's been a very enjoyable time for me.
One of those was Ludlow.
Yes, 4 years ago, we premiered the first act of Ludlow by David Mason and Lori Lakeman, and I'm hoping that someday soon we'll hear the rest of that show. They will be premiering their collaboration, The Scarlet Letter, with Opera Colorado in April, I think. So another good opportunity to hear some fantastic, fantastic music.
Comments from the chorus? There are a lot of exposed parts for the chorus in there with no piano. My gosh, that's difficult. Any thoughts?
It's always really fun to work through a new piece, and I think especially with modern work, you get to play with some more jazzy chords, some intervals that kind of clash a little bit. When we're really confident on it, sometimes you can hear some cool overtones, and that's always a really fun part of the experience.
Let's open it up, folks. We have about 15 or 20 minutes here for conversation. And how many of you have never been to an opera premiere before? There you go. Come on. There are no incorrect questions, so here you go. This is a great moment.
Seems like in the libretto, you can't say much in so many words because we're saying there's too many words. You can't write music to express the words. Is that confinement?
Well, I really enjoyed that. The thing about writing poetry, which is, my passion, but, you work a lot in isolation. And I am not the caliber of anybody on the stage, but I'm a little bit of a musician. I sing in a choir. And so I really enjoyed kind of stepping back, knowing that the composer was going to add to it. The refrain, Lucy's refrain, "This is all," that was actually kind of my working draft, and I was going to change that because I thought it wasn't interesting. And as I lived with it, I thought that simple phrase is actually very true and very important to the mood I was trying to get to. When John's parts got wordy, it's because I was really using actual words from John Audubon's letters and journals, and you did that beautifully. But now that we've seen it performed, it's all good feedback for me to see what works and what doesn't.
Enid.
I'm curious to know what you have in mind for the action as this becomes a full opera. What will happen? What will the story take?
In Act 2,
Would you repeat the question?
yes, what else is going to happen in the story is the question. Where's the action? She's going to she is going to make the decision to get the copper plate smelted. And that's kind of the climax. There's a theme of fire in here. John Audubon did have these annual bonfires where he burned his work he wasn't happy with. There were sections of the libretto I'm a little ready to burn. And so that's the climax. And that's what happens in Act 2. If we expanded it beyond that, I would probably go back and get more of their marriage in there. They really came very close to divorcing when he was in Europe. And she needed, and I did allude to that in some of the lines, she was a partner for him. He could not have he couldn't have done what he had done without her. Yet she wanted to know that his love for her was first. And when he went to Europe and he's finally building his fame, he was getting a little big-headed, and I think she was feeling not sure what her place was, and the part of the libretto about not uprooting the family alludes to that. But they were about ready to divorce. She was living in Louisiana at the time. He's in Europe. And he comes back to, I believe, Ohio, and he's staying with one of his sons, and they were both being very stubborn. Like, you know, we're going to meet there, and she refused to do it, but he wasn't going to go any farther. But then once he got home into the United States, he couldn't resist it, so he gets to Louisiana. He's riding on horseback in the middle of the night to go see her, arrives at like 6 in the morning. She's teaching music, she's with a student, and you know, he bursts through the door and they hug and embrace. I mean, it's very operatic, I think. Don't you? Yeah.
I mean, there's a little more to the story about why he was going to smelt the plates and so on.
Why she smelted the
Yeah,
plates?
why she
Yeah.
was going to do it that they may not know.
Okay, maybe that needs to be. She's broke. She's very, very poor.
And he's died, right? So
Yeah, this is it. When it opened, she's a widow, and he's actually been gone for several years now. You know, about 20 years, and she's extremely poor, and she ends up moving back to Kentucky in a boarding house. That was the flashback in here. Yeah, and it's hard because we didn't do set changes and scene changes. But when Lucy's remembering their early marriage in Kentucky, that's the flashback.
And then the smelting. Why so?
Smelting for money. Is that what you're wanting me to say?
Well, yeah, but then the climax is prevented, right? So.
Well, it's not prevented. It's I knew the exact numbers. There were a couple hundred copper plates, and most of them were smelted. But there was 80 were saved, or 80 were smelted. But there's a boy that works at Phelps Dodge. That also happens in Act 2, Enid. That recognizes what they are, and he held a bunch back. And he's in the choir, not today, and he steps out and he has a small part in Act 2. Spencer, yes.
Sorry, I thought there was another question there that you.
Well, I was wondering, saying that I thought they would be sold as prints, engravings, all of them. You're saying they have been melted down?
Yeah, for the gold, for the copper. Sorry. And so apparently, and maybe Meredith has some knowledge of this. I think Lucy Audubon, who is a very shrewd businesswoman, realized that the engravings weren't going to hold up anyway, according to my research. So she felt like they were going to decrease in value, and so she wanted to get them smelted while she could still make good money from them. Michael.
Laura Karen, does either of you have a favorite bird?
It's interesting that you say that. I have a lot of favorite birds, but I love the kingfisher.
I like the nighthawk. It's this kind of hoarse, I don't know. I can't do it. And they fly around at night, and it's always almost mystical for me to hear the nighthawk. While I have this, may I add this was about the process, the composing process, more the tools and things. I wanted to address, especially because I know the chorus part was difficult, and there wasn't a lot of support in the instrumental parts. Usually what I do, if I had had more time and knew that this was coming, is I will do recordings using digital technology, and I'll have each voice part, I'll make that more prominent and loud, and then all the other parts, including the leads, in the background, so you can get used to singing with a chorus, but with a little more prominence for your part, and I do that as a matter of course. this was a little more difficult than it normally would be. So I just wanted to add that.
Lindy.
Simple question after all these good ones. The Libby Larson that you recorded, it was not trying to thing, was it?
No, it was, what was it? It was me, Brenda Euland, you're all nodding. I knew you would know who she was. A woman who lived, she died in the 80s, I think, late 90s, or early 90s. Minnesotan writer who was really a wonderful person, feminist, and Libby met her when she was near the end of her life, and this 8-song cycle, 40 minutes long, is from her book Me, which is a memoir she wrote in the very middle of her life at age 44. It's a great book. She was a fascinating woman. So we did that as a premiere, and we also have a song, Dona Loge, a freestanding song she wrote in 2011, and the songs from Letters, the Calamity Jane cycle, which has been recorded many times, but it just worked, because strong women, yeah.
Yes, it's a great question. She's saying, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but that Jane, that there's that often, biographers have kind of an intimate connection to their subject, and she's asking me what drew me to the characters, and I can partially answer it, and I think I need to think about it more. But I was initially drawn to Lucy. And this, her role as a woman with this man who is bigger than life, larger than life, and even as somebody studying him 200 years later, he's larger than life. You're trying to tell Lucy's story. You can't tell it without John. And that's okay. I made peace with that. So that's part of it. The other part of it is a lot of my poetry, I think, deals with our relationship to nature, sometimes skeptically, and in my own personal relationship. So much of what I experience, except for when I visit my dear friends in southern Colorado, is in museums or in a city park, and my relationship with nature is removed. So I'm kind of critical of that, both personally and socially.
Others?
I got a question. How about your, for the composer, the key signature? How did you choose a tonal center and a tempo, to get, because it's always subject to change as you're moving along and developing,
Yeah.
Was it strictly the key set for the singers?
No.
Or, okay.
No, I intentionally, it was pointed out to me that in some cases I made it extra hard. Not intentionally, but, I have to think about that for a moment. I start, with a general knowledge of who will be singing and what their voice part, I'm sorry, let me back up, because I didn't know we would have these wonderful singers here. So I think about the character to address the question about, the range and keys and things, is I again imagine that person, and I just imagined John as a baritone. Now, I don't know if that was true, but, and Lucy as a soprano. And what's your second part of the
some of the
key
more technical things, the composition, key signature, tempo.
Tempo for me, well, when I'm writing, it's hard for me to answer that in a technical way, because when I'm writing, I feel it. Like a poet might, a performance poet perhaps, who's reading, and I have an idea of the tempo that feels right to me. As far as the keys, I imagine the music, and I really don't, the keys I don't set out and say, okay, I'm going to write in this key, because I usually basically, I guess, wing it in a way, until it feels right for me. Now, in some cases, for example, it doesn't. In this case, for Adam, I had things that were very low, actually, for a baritone, and he adjusted that automatically. It's always a composer's dream, and when you do something that the singers just automatically fix it. Now, I think, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it's all a discovery process, is what you're saying.
Well, I think I have a different process than a lot of people. I don't have a music degree at all. I think I have a musical brain. My birth parents had that kind of mind, and a piano player my mother was, and strings players in my back, what do you call it, the antecedents? Sorry, I've had a stroke, so I'm struggling with not very verbal as I normally would be. So my process is very different than a lot of, somebody who's maybe has a degree in music, although I've always been involved with music. And, I do write a typical score, and I use phenomena to do that. And I've learned a lot over the years just by doing it. Try it. It won't kill you, and you don't have to let anybody hear it if it doesn't turn out right?
So